Hello, BookTube. I'm Jonathan, and today I'm going to be recommending 5 sci-fi books for fantasy readers. And in order to get you guys some fantasy recommendations for sci-fi fans, I have recruited, I think, one of the funniest and smartest people on BookTube, Jake Bishop. Jake, I'm a sci-fi guy. Are you the fantasy guy?
I'm a fantasy guy. I don't know if I'm the fantasy guy. You know, when you said you had one of the smartest and funniest fantasy people, I was like, wait, Alan's on the show? But then I was like, what? It's me. So I'm definitely, I think, like, I read sci-fi, but I'm probably 90-10 fantasy sci-fi. And honestly, most of my favorite sci-fi series are going to be like the ones where you talk about where they're kind of stylistically more like epic fantasies that just happen to be in space.
Well, I know you read a bit of sci-fi because you're a fan of Project Hail Mary. That's one of my favorite modern sci-fi books. So I trust you. I trust you to give some fantasy recs that'll have some crossover appeal. I will kick us off with our first sci-fi recommendation for fantasy fans. I think you'll like this one, Jake. And that is Empire of Silence, book 1 of the Sun Eater series by Christopher Rocchio. Kind of showing off with my kind of hard to obtain hardback cover there. So the premise for this one is that it is Sword and Planet, space opera, first-person POV, and we follow Hadrian Marlowe that tells us he destroys a sun that wipes out an alien race and kills billions. And so we have to go on this adventure with him and make a decision for ourselves whether we think he is a hero or a monster. So I think this will appeal to fantasy fans because stylistically, this is kind of sci-fantasy. I think there's going to be some familiar tropes, some character archetypes that'll help fantasy fans kind of make the transition into space. And also because of the prose. I know that some fantasy fans might be a bit wary of sci-fi writers. They have a bit of a reputation for being a bit dry. You know, they might be thinking, how am I going to switch from a Robin Hobb or a Patrick Rothfuss to sci-fi writers? Well, Christopher Rocchio is amongst the best that we have. I think you're going to enjoy his writing a lot. So, Jake, do you like my pick? Do you think this is a good place to start for
it would be
fans?
By far my number one pick because I have a review on my channel for Empire of Silence, and the thumbnail says sci-fi for epic fantasy fans. So I could not agree more. This is basically like, this reads like an epic fantasy. If you are a fan of big, sprawling, epic fantasies with giant worlds and in all that insane stuff, and you're like, hey, what if we just had that? But instead of set on a planet, it's set in a giant galactic empire. And instead of magic swords, we have science swords that are somehow even cooler.
Yeah.
Then yeah, Sun Eater's for you.
I like it. All right, we're on board.
That's
recommend
the best
Sun
pick.
Eater.
Yeah, that's
We
the
peaked
best.
early, thanks, Jake. I'll try to top it later. What's your first pick?
So my first pick that I have, I had no idea how to order these. I ended up ordering these somewhat randomly. And the first one I have is The Books of Babel by Josiah Bancroft, which is kind of a steampunk. It's like a fantasy series that it's an alternate setting, so it's technically fantasy, but it's somewhat ambiguous whether things are actually supernatural or whether it's just like really fancy engineering. And it has some really cool stuff that I think would appeal to sci-fi fans like the Sun Eater. It also is really, really, really well written. I think Josiah Bancroft has a unique voice that does not sacrifice clarity, but is also very distinctive and just extremely pleasant to read. The protagonist is kind of a middle-aged teacher who's going on his honeymoon to the Tower of Babel, the most famed center of culture in the world that, of course, will have nothing that goes wrong, and there will be no corruption, and everything will go pleasant, and it's just about them having a really great vacation for 4 books, and definitely nothing bad happens. I'm lying. Yeah,
Well,
it's
the
just
couple's out there. You've got your next vacation spot.
Yeah, exactly. Don't worry about there being any stressful situations or betrayal. So one thing I really like about it, I feel like a lot of almost one of the reasons sci-fi is unique is the premise of how outside things or changes in technology or society can affect people. And I think this series is extremely good at having the setting and the scenarios influence like the characters and themes, which is one reason why I think it'll have crossover appeal, aside from the fact that, I mean, it's arguably not fantasy because nothing is overtly supernatural. You can decide whether you think it's supernatural or just really advanced engineering.
Gotcha. I like this one. I haven't read the series, but this one did pique my interest, even though I am focusing on sci-fi. I like to kind of keep tabs on what fantasy I might like to pick up in the future, and I don't know if this is a genre that exists, but to me this sounded like steampunk fantasy.
I think
Steampunk
it would
normally
count.
something associated with sci-fi. Is that a thing that exists, Jake?
So everyone tells me a different definition of steampunk. Some people are just like, oh yeah, steampunk is just like this time period setting. And then some people are like, no, it's like a really unique setting. So I don't even know what steampunk means at this point, but I'm pretty sure Sendling qualifies.
I'm not a steampunk expert. If you are, you can clarify in the comments. I think it is that time period's prediction of the future.
That would, I mean, I think that might apply. I don't know, it's not really the future, but it's kind of the Tower of Babel is very, like, could be described as, like, what someone in that time period would picture as, like, a mega advanced tower. It feels both ancient, but also really new. It's really cool setting.
I like it. Well, I'm a sci-fi fan. I'm interested, so I think Jake picked well. For my second pick, the second sci-fi book for fantasy readers, I think this is another one Jake might like, and that is Hyperion by Dan Simmons, the first book in the Hyperion Cantos. So the premise for this one is that 7 pilgrims are on a pilgrimage to the planet of Hyperion to visit time tombs that are traveling backwards in time and are guarded by this guy, the Shrike. So it is told in kind of the Canterbury Tales style format. Each character tells their backstory, why they're going, and we also get their trip together to the planet of Hyperion. So I think that fantasy fans might enjoy this one because it's really character-driven storytelling. I think there's a great story, great concepts, but sometimes sci-fi can kind of focus quite heavily on the concepts, and fantasy readers might want a bit more characters. Well, the characters in Hyperion, I think, are some of the best written characters in sci-fi. There's a great mix of genres, because there's some sci-fi concepts, but a bit of horror, a bit of fantasy, and I like the whole series. But start with Hyperion, see if you like it, and then decide whether to continue.
I would agree with that again. I also think, I'm a fantasy fan and I love Hyperion, so there you go. Proof is in the there's the proof. So far I was thinking, like, I wonder what he's gonna pick. So far I'm 2 for 2, but these are the two I was like, I would have bet a large amount on these two being on here. I'm not as sure what's gonna be for the next 3, but I'd absolutely agree. Fantasy fans, Hyperion, it rules. You should read it. It's every genre though. If name a genre, Hyperion is that genre.
Romance.
All of them.
Detective.
I mean, it's the most, in order, it's the most like sci-fi and then horror. But it's everything.
So.
It's everything.
Yeah. All right, so we're in agreement. I think I like the sequel more than Jake. That's maybe a discussion for another day. But we both recommend Hyperion.
Absolutely, yes. And I still think I still enjoyed the sequel, and you should read the sequel. But he liked it more. Also, I'd like to say you're pointing at something like on the book was impressive. I always underestimate how hard it's gonna be because my video is mirrored on here, and you pointed at the Shrike dude. So good.
We got there in the end. Thank you. All right, what's your second recommendation, Jake?
All right, my next pick is The 5th Season by N.K. Jemisin, which I've read this year, relatively recently. I don't even know what I was trying to say there. But this is set in kind of like a very, 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 very distant future. It already sounds sci-fi. And once again, there are things it's kind of ambiguous whether they're supernatural or not. There are giant crystal things floating in the sky. Are they spaceships? Are they magic spaceships? Who knows? You're gonna have to read and find out. And this, I have a review for up on this as well, because you're probably, if you've read this book, if you've heard of this book, you know it's second person, and then you don't actually know what it's about. So it is about, there is a cycle of like apocalyptic events that take place in the world, like seismic events. The world has become extremely seismically unstable. Like there's a ton of earthquakes, and every once in a while there's like near what would be considered an apocalyptic level, like seismic event, like Yellowstone volcano erupting. And they happen roughly once a century. And this book starts, this is nice because like Sun Eater, I can say something that sounds like a spoiler, but it isn't. In chapter 1, the world ends. And it's like this season, they usually take like a decade. This one, might just be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 600 decades or so, whatever. Just a while. And it's probably more character driven than some sci-fis, but it's also very ideas driven. And it kind of has, I've seen this described as like if Dune is like, actually, you'll probably have Dune. That's another one I was gonna. Never mind. If Dune is science fantasy, this is like fantasy sci-fi, where it's like, if Dune is like sci-fi that some people are kind of say is fantasy, but you're like, is it though? This is fantasy that some people are like, it's kind of sci-fi, and you're like, is it though? But it's probably fantasy, but it's more sci-fi. All right, 5th season. That's what I got.
So I have read this one. I kind of accidentally read it, thinking it was going to be a bit more sci-fi than it was. I'd say there's some sci-fi elements.
More fantasy.
There's definitely
for sure.
some environmental science, if that counts. But yes, I'd say it leans more fantasy. I was a little bit more mixed on this one than you were. I really enjoyed your review of it, and I would agree. I think its reputation, people kind of focus on like the second person, and I don't think that you should let that put you off. I think it does have a very interesting writing style, interesting characters. To me, I found it a little bit hard to get into, but I think if you can get into that world, if it works for you, I think it's a very rich setting, and it does some interesting things. So, yeah, I can definitely see the crossover appeal for some sci-fi fans.
I hope so, because if not, then everyone will tell me I'm wrong, and that'll be unfortunate.
Yeah, come back. Let Jake know your thoughts. Don't hold back. My third recommendation: sci-fi books for fantasy fans. Red Rising. Kind of a shiny cover there. I kind of like that. Anyway, Red Rising by Pierce Brown. And if you take a look at the back cover, piercing blue eyes as well. My goodness. All right, Red Rising. I have read the original trilogy. I haven't read the new ones, but focusing on the first book, this is set in a world with a caste system. People are put into colors. If you're in the red, you're at the bottom of the totem pole. Gold, you're at the top of society. And we follow Darrow, who is a red, has a tough life, goes through some tragic things, and he says, you know what, I'm going to try and infiltrate these golds. And they have kind of like a military battle school process, but it's a little bit tougher than basic training. It gets pretty full on. It's kind of Hunger Games-esque. And so we follow Darrow as he competes in this, and the series kind of grows into a bigger, grander space opera as you continue. But I think where we start is going to be relatable for some fantasy fans, especially if you like that game kind of element, that Hunger Games style. But it's pretty heavy, it's pretty dark, it's pretty full on, and yeah, this book will make you turn red, fill you with rage, I reckon.
I forgot you read this, or I would have had 4 predictions for what you would have had, because yeah.
Jake's feeling pretty good about himself. I'm going to predict now you didn't get the last 2. The last 2 are a little bit...
They're curveballs? Okay.
Curveballs, but yeah.
Okay. Because I'm terrible
at Red Rising, Jake?
I have. I'm the same as you. I've read the original trilogy. I was waiting for a Lightbringer release date to read the next 2, so I guess now I'll probably read the next 2 before the 6th book, Lightbringer, comes out. And similar to, I would agree that these are technically sci-fi, like setting-wise and aesthetically, but in terms of like feel and how they read, they kind of feel more like an epic fantasy. And also that book 2 and 3 are very different from book 1. While book 1 is a little more, as you said, like almost Hunger Games-esque, which take that with a pinch of salt. It's still very different from Hunger Games. Book 2 and 3 are more like, hey, giant space opera war thing. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I think it is the branding as well. I mean, that's like the Mockingjay cover, right? Anyway, if you like Hunger Games, read this. If you don't like Hunger Games, the Hunger Games comparison's overblown anyway. So
read it anyway. Yeah,
give it a go.
Exactly. Okay, I've got all hardcovers now. You know, that's actually the order I ended up going in. I just put the hardcovers on the bottom. And we have The Aeronauts Windlass by Jim Butcher, which Jim Butcher, his agent was like, hey, what genre is this? And he told him, his agent, this is a steam opera. And they're like, Jim, you can't just invent a genre. And he's just like, stop me. So my premise for this is that it is kind of post-apocalyptic in that everyone lives in these massive stone spires and the surface world is horrifying. And it has a combination of like, it's like, it has ships that look like sail ships, but they have like this weird crystal technology thing that lets them fly and shoot plasma guns at people. And also it has talking cats. There you go. I don't need longer than that to pitch it. There we go.
Jake, how have I never heard of this before? You said Jim Butcher, and I was like, okay, is he going to go Dresden Files, Codex Alera, and then...
I think the reason you probably haven't heard of this is that he wrote this kind of right before his 6-year writing slump. So he wrote this, and then he wrote Skin Game, and then he had some personal issues and didn't really write things. So it hasn't been continued, but he's working on book 2 right now. Jim Butcher is not known for his book 1s. This is, I think, his best book 1. So if we continue the trend of later Jim Butcher books always being better than earlier ones in series, then book 2 should rule, because book 1 was already pretty fantastic. It's relatively large, but it's really well paced, and it's Jim, so it's really easy to read, and it starts really fast. So would recommend to sci-fi fans who this would be more of like the fans of like space opera, like the more battle style sci-fis with like space battles, except instead of in space, it's randomly with flying pirate ships that have flying sail ships that have plasma cannons. Why not? It's Jim.
That sounds awesome. More people need to read this book, apparently. It sounds great.
I would agree with that. You can read it when book 2's eventually going to come out, because I think he's almost done writing it.
Oh, awesome. Okay, my 4th sci-fi book for fantasy fans is The Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut. So, this one, we follow the richest man on the planet, as well as a man that appears and reappears on different planets. We have a robot designed by aliens and a dog. And they travel from Earth, Mars, Mercury, Titan, one of the moons on Saturn. And while it is an interesting story, what I think the strength of this book is the themes, the way it examines things like free will, omniscience, the meaning of life. And I think this will appeal to fans of Terry Pratchett's Discworld. I hear that comparison. From what I know about Discworld, I think it's quite apt, because this book is very funny. It's quite a quick, short read. The stories are good, but it's really about people and the kind of absurdist sense of humor. So something a bit different. It's not hard sci-fi. It's not an epic space opera. I think you can get through it quite quickly, and I think it'll touch you, and I think it'll make you laugh.
You are correct. I didn't see that one coming at all. First 2, I was like 3 solid hits, and this curveball hit me, and I swung so hard at that the pitcher got a breeze, and I didn't see that coming at all.
Jake called Dune. He called Dune and whiffed on it.
Yeah, that was a call, and that was just like, I swung, and like the ball hit the ground before me, and I swung at a high pitch, fell out of my shoes. Yeah. So,
have you read any Vonnegut?
I actually haven't. I don't think I have, which is kind of weird, because obviously he's an extremely, extremely famous author. Just thinking to myself, have I actually not? I don't think I have. So he's on the list, because I kind of have been meaning to read a couple classics in 2023, although he's not first on that list, but he's somewhere on that list. I think I own a Vonnegut somewhere. I forget which one it is, though.
I've read 12, 14, something. Nearly everything that he's written. He's one of my favorite writers. Sirens of Titan's a great place to start. Cat's Cradle, Slaughterhouse 5. Anyway, we'll bring back Jake another day, and we'll convince him to read some Vonnegut. But if you're a fantasy fan,
maybe I'll start
if you're
there.
a Discworld fan, check out The Sirens of Titan.
Okay, and for my next pick, I have something that, he called sci-fi, but Empire. I'm kidding. I'm not taking Empire Silence. I was doing it as a joke. It's totally a fantasy series. This counts. No. I was hoping timing-wise that you'd have Empire Silence last, so I was guessing to have it here, but it didn't work. You led it first. So I've been defeated. No, the actual suggestion is the Greenbone Saga, which this is the one where this was the one I picked last. I'm like, am I stretching here a little bit? But hear me out. So the Greenbone, the fantasy premise actually could also like be a sci-fi premise in a different book, which is basically there's one like little group in society who have a monopoly on this really powerful resource, and it happens to be somewhat magical. It's jade. I know, it's pretty shocking based on the title. That lets them do a bunch of advanced stuff. This easily could have just been like, these people went into space and found an asteroid and found it on an asteroid, and now they have like the same thing going on. So it could be a sci-fi premise, and that's most of the basis of me picking this, other than just like, I think it's a really good series. But really
I believe you. I'm sold.
So yeah, that's what I got. This one is granted the biggest stretch of the 5, but hey, I wanted to pick Sun Eater because it's kind of a fantasy series, and it's for appeal for sci-fi fans because it's sci-fi, so can't go wrong there. But I went with Greenbone.
What's your favorite aspect of Greenbone? What's
so I'd say overall, like, it's very solid across the board, but I think the cast of characters is definitely my favorite part of it, in that not necessarily like having one character who I love more than everyone else, but having like 20 characters who I think are all really well done and complex and interesting. But I also think like the premise and how like it affects both the people and like the political situations of like one tiny island having a complete monopoly on the most valuable substance in the planet is really interesting and kind of like the type of thing that could be explored in a sci-fi novel. So I figure sci-fi fans might find it interesting. Yeah,
which brings me to my fifth recommendation, Dune. I'm kidding. I like that one. That is on my list. I think that's actually quite high on my list. That's probably top 5 fantasy series that I want to try. I've heard a lot of good things about Greenbone. I like that it has a kind of unique setting and feel. I think it would kind of give me a kind of well-rounded intro to fantasy. So.
For those who don't know, I forgot to mention this. It's a secondary world urban fantasy book, so it's set in technology equivalent of like the mid 1900s, but it's also like a completely secondary world. Like it's not Earth, which is kind of not usually what you see. Usually, if you see a urban fantasy in mid 20th century, it's like Earth and there's like a shadow supernatural world, but this is completely separate world.
Interesting. Well, I am intrigued by that one. I'm glad you recommend it, Jake, affirming my fantasy to read list, which brings us to my fifth sci-fi book recommendation for fantasy fans, and that is Deathstalker by Simon R. Green. So the premise for this one is that Owen Deathstalker is the head of his family's clan, and he is unexpectedly outlawed. Empress puts a bounty on his head. He has to flee. He has to try and get away, team up with outlaws. His family secrets are revealed. It puts him on this kind of collision course towards the power of the throne. So it's very tropey. It's very self-aware, but I think it's done with love and fun and creativity. It's a little bit pulpy, but it's very entertaining. It's a fast read, and if you're looking for something that might be in the vein of, I haven't read them, but just based on reputation, something that's kind of fun, like a Dresden Files or maybe Kings of the Wild, I think this is going to scratch that itch for you, because I couldn't put it down. There, look. I mean, look at that cover. I mean, where are your sleeves, bro? This is... I wouldn't have thought necessarily that this would be my type of thing, and once I picked it up, I was absolutely hooked. It's a lot of fun. Deathstalker.
I was feeling so confident I was going to predict these 3 in. I was like, I'm doing so well. I know what's going on. Then the last 2, just like this one, if I didn't just miss, you hit me with the ball, and then the umpire said it was a strike, and I'm just like, what is going on?
The hit by pitch strikeout. I like it. Yeah. Well, it's not your fault, because people don't talk about this series that much. I think Brian Lee Durfee likes it, but other than that, I haven't really seen many people talk about it.
I've never heard of it, so...
It's kind of fantastical too. You got some like weird stuff like telepathy and blood-sucking undead soldiers. So it's a good mix of kind of like some weird fantasy stuff in space.
Nice. This is what we like to see. So for the final book, I mean, people had to see this one coming, right? Like, see the Avatar. It's got people criticize it. Some people don't like a book because it's like one of the things basically is science. I have a fancy book that I can flex to everyone. Like you all saw this coming, right? Like this had to happen. I don't know if it's actually the most correct, like for sci-fi fans, but I was like, there's no way we're not including Way of Kings, right? Like, even though it has the most fantasy title ever. So it's kind of funny to recommend something to sci-fi fans because book 4 is sci-fi-ish. But in general, across the series, other than me just loving like almost all the characters and plot and everything, it really does have like actually like advancing in technology, and it's not an afterthought, which is somewhat rare for fantasy. A lot of times in fantasy series, the technology level is just kind of like static, which I think is one thing that's pretty different from every other genre, where people have swords, and if you're back in 100 years, their swords are the same, their armors are the same. This has he has kind of 2 series, and both of them have advancing technology. One of them, the advancing technology, is all very similar to Earth's technology, like it's kind of evolving very like one-to-one to Earth. This is where like technology is advancing, but it's advancing in a way that's completely different from Earth. So it's like eventually they're going to hit at some point in the Cosmere advanced technology, but their advanced technology will look completely different to like our advanced technology. And I think that's really cool. But also, I'm just a massive Stormlight shill who is going to try and push it on everyone. So I'll take any excuse to do so. And also, I just wanted to show off my fancy books because, like, how nice are they? Yeah.
They are super nice. And it was funny when you said it was obvious. I was like, oh, now I feel obligated to guess. And you pulled them out. And I was like, ooh, I recognize those. I know there's Sanderson. Is it Mistborn or Stormlight? And in my head, I was like, well, Allomancy, like eating metals and that having effects.
I'm
That's
not
kind of
gonna lie.
sciencey.
I
almost
mostly
guessed
just
Mistborn.
picked this based on the fact that I have the nicer copy of it to show to everyone instead of Mistborn. Also, I like it more. But I think like really Rhythm of War is like the most sciencey one, which, you know, all the sci-fi fans, that's kind of, there's a part of Rhythm of War that I think a lot of non-sci-fi fans were kind of like, this wasn't my favorite. But if the sci-fi fans will be like, oh, this rules, and then his work will not be in vain. Hi, Nick. Are you watching this video? What's up? He's a guy on Discord. He's a huge sci-fi guy who likes like 3 fantasy series. His favorite is Stormlight.
Jake's a good actor. He said that with such conviction. For a second, I thought we were streaming. I was like, oh, we got a comment.
No,
like,
I'm talking to future
streaming.
Nick. I'm talking to the future Nick who's maybe watching this video. So what's up, Nick?
Either you're a good actor or I'm dumb. But either way, hi, Nick.
Maybe I'm a good actor. Who knows? It's never been tested.
Yeah. Any casting agents watching this, try these books and get Jake in for a screen test.
Exactly. Yeah. I'll play anyone in Stormlight. I don't know.
Well, there you go. Yes, I definitely want to try Sanderson. I think I might start with Mistborn just because they're shorter. But, Stormlight, it looks amazing.
So, just going to say for starting Sanderson, because I have a video on this, it actually also is one that could apply for sci-fi fans, is The Emperor's Soul, which I'm pointing to. It's like 110 pages. It's also one of his more like sci-fi-esque. It's not sci-fi, it's fantasy, but like the way the magic works, being more sci-fi-esque, and it might be my favorite thing he's written. So if you're looking for somewhere to start, folks, Emperor's Soul. Not enough people read it. Yeah.
There you go. The Deathstalker of fantasy, Emperor's Soul, by little known up and coming author Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah, very, very, very. No one's ever heard of it. You'll get to be a hipster, totally, definitely not by like one of the most successful authors in the world.
Well, there you go. I think we did a good job. We've got 5 sci-fi books for you to try, 5 fantasy books for you to try. Let us know if you've read any of them and whether you agree with our picks. And if you haven't, let us know which ones sounded the most interesting to you, and you might pick them up. And
I'm really
say
curious.
Thanks to Jake.
Has anyone in the comments watching this read all 10 of these? If you have, I want to know. And you don't get anything, but you get to feel cool about yourself, I guess. I don't know.
They can be the judge. They can say who did
Yeah,
a better
they can
job.
say who did better. Yeah, if you've read all 10, you get to decide which of us did better at picking. But please pick me.
It's my channel. I'll just delete the comment if I don't like it. Anyway, that was fun. Thanks a lot for coming on, Jake. Really appreciate. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, go to Jake's channel first. Subscribe to that. Come back to this video. Hit like, subscribe. More sci-fi content coming soon.